Okay, this is architectural discussions meeting, and we have topic from James. James, do you want to present?
Sure, it'll be brief. I'm here to talk about the GraphQL capabilities for resolving and displaying information about the sitemap in the form of routes. The GraphQL API currently supports something called URL Resolver, and that's a specific query that was made based on a request by the PWA team to have something available for us to request to send a URL key as an argument to a GraphQL query and then receive the entity type of the page, the identity of the page within that table, and then potentially some later properties could be added to the schema there. So that was implemented for us quickly so that we could begin respecting business user managed storefront routes. But as our project has grown, it has become clear that the URL resolver concept is really more appropriately one use case of a general concept where we bind implementations in our React application to specific GraphQL types. So instead of the nonce type URL resolver results, which doesn't represent any other type of entity, I'm proposing that we start dealing in entities called specifically routes. And so that will be a route would be added as a type to the GraphQL schema, so that when a client-side application is navigating through the website and then querying for the entities that are supposed to be represented by different URLs, it can identify those entities as a distinct type, cache the type and its properties, and then also that type provides a natural place to store information about the display, which would allow the various types of per entity customizations that Magento currently supports in EAB tables and that business users come to expect. So again, just to, I guess, briefly demonstrate, there is a mechanism by which when you go to oh, you know what? I'm only sharing one browser tab. Just one moment. Okay. Come on. There we go. Okay. So when you visit a site like venia.magento.com, there is a GraphQL query that runs whenever you navigate to a new page. When I performed that navigation, all that the client-side app was aware of was that I attempted to navigate to the URL Venia tops. The location that is represented by the URL Venia tops, that's maintained in the category entities and then handled in the routing table or in the SEO redirects under Magento's architecture. But there's no way in the client-side application to maintain a full mapping of every single URL to every single entity. And since the PWA is fully API driven at runtime, that means there must be a way of determining that information through the API so it knows that it needs to route to a category page. The way that we do that is that we place a request in GraphQL, and this may not be very visible, so I'm going to increase the size, is that when the navigation begins, we place a request to the GraphQL API that asks the URL resolver, query, what the corresponding type and ID are for the URL veniatops.html. And the URL resolver query responds with a special string that belongs to an enum, which is extensible by various Magento modules. The catalog module adds the string category to the enum, for instance, and then the ID represents the unique, I guess, primary key within the identity table for these entities. So when we receive category and and then 19, that gives the PWA enough information to proceed with fetching not just the actual entity for the category itself, but also with, to fetch a particular named additional piece of code, in this case, root component category, which you can see here, which then fetches in the logic that is specific to displaying this category page and its pagination. And this way, the progressive web app makes sure that it's only fetching what it needs to display each successive screen state. So it's necessary for us to have something that retrieves this information, but there are downsides to category and product instead of, say, something more natural, so we don't have to maintain corresponding logic. Because with these things, category and product, we need to maintain sort of some custom code which correlates the product to a particular component, and then that component needs to know that it implements a view for the product types that are in the GraphQL scheme. So this connecting enumeration seems like it's unnecessary because GraphQL already provides a means for introspection into the type of something. So this proposes a type called route, which is an interface, and any entity which can be displayed as a page would implement that interface. If it already implements another interface, then it would use the multiple implementation feature of GraphQL to implement that. And then implementing that interface would by itself signify when our build tools are looking through the schema that there may be a page of this type and that we need in our project to have one of those root components that supports and displays a page of that type. So for instance, if the root query that returns items of this type received a product URL, we could request the type name, which is built in to the GraphQL specification, and it would return the concrete type, which implements product interface in this case. And that should be enough for us to go through our project and identify if there is a particular component that can do that. So for instance, right now, the structure of our project requires that any given return value from the URL resolver be supported by a particular component that has a doc block comment in it. In this case, for displaying CMS pages, we actually have a directive that is read at build time. So this is like front matter or metadata. And it says for this CMS page magic string, it can support and display the underlying entity of that type. And so then it performs the necessary queries to get that. So it would be much simpler if we could simply list simple product instead of, for instance, well, that's not CMS. If we could list, instead of the magic string product, which must be hand maintained, if we could just put simple product in this directive, or a comma separated list like simple product, configurable product, etc. Once you have that, then we have expanded the idea that is right now specific to root components to cover any type of component which can handle any type of data. And then the route concept is just one specific case of a larger concept of querying for items of a specific entity type and then seeing if there are corresponding views in your project which can display them. Another advantage to this is that with the route type that is actually a particular trait or interface of a real data type, we no longer have to place one query to get the type of the entity in question, which already indicates that the system knows about the entity. We don't have to place two queries to get the entity metadata and then the data itself. Instead, we can have a sequence of concrete type clauses so that when we fetch a route, we already know for various different content types what additional properties we need. So this concept of an interface supporting routes allows us to get all of the data in a single call, which is much more efficient and simple and high performance. And then lastly, having this single required implemented string called display metadata is a suggestion And the name of that property, I think, can be under review. But the idea is that, for instance, you could use it as a simple tagging scheme or flagging scheme so that an extension developer or theme developer could replace the theme variant dropdown for a given entity with a dropdown that supports some enumeration of these things. So then when we request, for instance, the product foo, it returns a display metadata value of featured, and that would allow us in our root component dispatch to actually route different individual entities to different root component implementations. As you can see right now, root component category is actually called root component category default. This doesn't specify default, but since these directives can take arbitrary additional properties, then you could have two competing or two complementary implementations of a product page. And then in the entity itself, using the display metadata string value, the backend could store EAV-like properties to indicating that a given product has a different treatment, like a dark mode or a featured or microsite. So this also enables a simple place to store routing data instead of having to replicate the logic for routing across our middle tier and our front tier and our back tier. In both supporting GraphQL as an actual underlying schema for the sitemap, in allowing for a simple place to store extensibility data, and in supporting fewer calls to get the same information, I think this is a big advantage over URL Resolver. And it also is part of a concept that we are supporting more and more on the PWA team, which is to sort of store as much about the extension system that is supported, or the extension state that the store is in, what modules are turned on, what custom pages exist, to display that in the GraphQL schema as much as possible. So in this case, for instance, create account, even if it's a built-in route, would actually be implemented as a simple GraphQL type, just enough so that when we request from our client side, what is the identity of create account, it does at least return a type name. These, of course, seem like you shouldn't have to bounce off the server to do it, but potentially in the future, there would be enhancements by which we can analyze the schema at build time in order to build these routes. The point is that the Magento instance serves as a single source of truth for the sitemap and the valid URLs, and it uses the GraphQL route interface to implement and share this as an API. And that's my story.
Yeah, I believe the first question, how Magento will know about what the type name, because we don't have this concept in Magento today. You have only layout updates name.
Layout updates in this case are not fully supported. It's like layout updates have a lot of complex features, and so this is a move in that direction. But right now, all we're doing is using built-in GraphQL introspection to get the type name as just as a string for us to use in our own product to resolve things like root components. So unlike layout directives, this is much simpler binding. It doesn't have instructions in it besides a type name, which you can then search for implementations of, and maybe one string value that we could later use. But this already exists in our GraphQL schema, so this shouldn't be too much of an implementation burden.
Yeah, but I mean, how Magento know what type is the return?
That would require that it actually be declared in the schema. So implementers of GraphQL today and people refactoring the GraphQL schema as it stands would have to additionally write this type information into the schema document, or whatever generates the schema, you would need to add something that declares routable types like this to say that they implement the routable interface.
But see, I don't understand how Magento will map concrete URL with type. Where is this information will be stored? In what format?
The URL resolver query does it somehow, so however that works, I think we just need to
So I
expand it.
guess each route provider, like if there are any routers, they should provide this information. Yeah, as I understand, it should still go through the same resolution of the URL, but you want to return information in a different way.
Yeah, I think that's
so yeah,
right.
from the backend side, we'll need to look.
So, for instance, like,
and it also may be problematic to return a specific product type. It is easy to say that specific URL represents product because we can just use some regular expression and we know like how it works on the backend. We take URL, we look at URL rewrite table, we find the base URL, which is like products ID and then ID of the product, or category ID, ID of the category, and parsing that URL, we know that this is product, for example, but we have no way of knowing type of that product. Is it simple or configurable, or what type of product is it? So it's much more complicated operation to understand that. We don't have it stored.
So you're saying it's like a lot of types of introspection, it's expensive.
I mean, we will have to make query to database to figure out what type of product it is.
I see. Okay. Well,
do you need to know what type of product? Like,
at least according to James's presentation, he wants to know that.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand. You have different templates for different products or something like that?
So we can, I mean, we want to support it, but if there's a significant performance burden to it, I think it would still be useful for us to know whether, for instance, it implements product interface. But that's more complex to do in the GraphQL introspection language. You know, in this demonstration, like we just ask for possible types at build time on RoutableInterface, and it would return us this full list of all of the concrete types which implement it. That's not to do with any particular entities. It's just, that's one type of introspection that's just built in. And then when we do that, we would like look through our project to make sure that there exist components that say they can display this and this and this and this. But since we could say a component might exist that displays both simple product and configurable product, then we would just have to have that component say list fully that it supports simple product and configurable product and product interface. And then maybe all that we would receive from the query that returns the route, when we request for type name, it would have to be the concrete type, right? Because that's GraphQL's actual implementation. But we can ask for what interfaces are implemented. I don't know offhand what introspection that is, but if that's cheaper, we can do that instead. We just, you know, we would need then to make sure we have a more complex type query than that, and see if we, for instance, have a component that can display anything of type product interface. So we can make compromises here. I just know that we want to use the type system wherever possible.
Mm-hmm. So I guess it needs complement, like additional proposal from backend side to see what we can implement and what effort it will require, as I understand.
And also, if you look at the example on the screen, won't it violate the GraphQL schema when we say type name and then we return this simple product? Because I believe type name will be string, because it is type name of the object which is returned by route field or route query.
I'm not sure I understand.
So usually if you request this __ type name, you will get type of the object which is returned by route query, correct?
Mm-hmm.
But the actual route query is not returning simple products or categories. It is returning strings.
Oh.
So well, it looks weird.
It shouldn't be. I mean, it receives a string as an argument, but it returns an object that implements RoutableInterface.
I see what you mean.
Yeah, so the route query would query across a
if we change schema, change the return time, it measure backwards incompatible change. If it's currently
No, there
we
is
have
no route
different.
at the moment. No, there is no route. There is
Yeah.
resolve info or something like that.
Ah, okay.
Like resolve.
Yeah. I hope that implementing an additional interface in an existing type would not be a backwards incompatible change because it doesn't make any existing type queries break as far as I know. But I don't want this to be a backwards incompatible change. I can change this proposal until it isn't one if we see that it is one.
So, and do you expect to receive actual data in response?
We would hope so. Another possibility would be that that we still have to conduct two queries, which is acceptable because there are still other advantages. But since I guess it just makes sense to us that since the GraphQL query is already finding out that it's a category of ID 19, then it makes sense because of GraphQL being what it is that we would also fetch that link, that we would kind of in theory do that join. So
but the problem is, in this case, you will have to write these fragments for arbitrary type in the schema. So whatever type you have, you'll have to add it to fragment section. Because you can potentially get absolutely anything.
Yeah, it could. And so the idea here is that for common fragments or common types in your project, you would enhance your route query so that it can use these fragments, and that reduces the number of calls that it has to make. But even in the case where the built application encounters a URL of a type that it doesn't know how to handle, or that this can't fetch, it at least will load the base app shell. And then if there is another component which subscribes to the output of that query, then that component can perform a follow-on query. So that's the less optimized pathway, but we still want to support it. On the other hand, right now we're not using fragments very much, but we want to, and we want to be able to say, modify a query at build time so that it can include more fragments. Potentially we would make the route query special so that the build time process would actually edit the query tree in place before writing it out onto the file system as a bundle. So you could add fragments from different extensions into this route query so that it can get things with the appropriate type. But I think that's a future optimization that's not necessary for us.
Okay, I have quite a related question, but don't direct. Why we decide to make routing on server side, not on client side?
Because the business user should be able to change routes. In Venia, like this Deliria 2-layer tank, that's a URL key that's controlled on the admin side in the product entry form, or it's controlled by the data that's like uploaded through an integration. And the only way to route that client side would be to build all of that data into the application that's delivered at the client, which would mean like putting it as a big literal object into a JavaScript file. So for a large site or with a large catalog, that could potentially be many megabytes. So the only place to store site information that may change between deploys, like if you change a URL key, would be to store it on the server. So that has to be at least one source of truth for it. And that means that we would at least want to have as few sources of truth as possible, so it makes sense to route on the server side.
Okay.
It's also a competitive differentiator. I mean, you could make a PWA that doesn't respect RSEO URLs at all, and that just has its own dynamic routing scheme where it would support like product / SKU, category / ID, but it's a bad SEO problem, and it reduces confidence to show that there's been such a downgrade in functionality in order to move to a PWA. So it was important for us to support custom URLs generated by the business user out of the box. So even though this is a little slower than having a hard-coded scheme, it's important to the project.
And as I understood, the problem only if we go on store on a concrete route, because if we start from root, it's no problem to rebuild. Yeah.
If you view the storefront route, like you're saying the
I
homepage.
mean, so if all customers will start from root, we can skip routing because storefront routing, because we always know that, for example, list of product, when you click on product, you know information about routing for this product or for
So
category.
I'm sorry, when you're saying that if I click on a route, there's no information here about that at the actual entity type. I'm sorry. Can you please repeat?
I mean that we need storefront routing only in case when your client go to concrete page from, for example, for Google, it click on product and go to concrete product page. In this case,
I
we
see.
need to, because if we all guys start navigation from the root, you always can build routing because you know always what the category people click, and you know all information about product or about category. So you can build the route without call to the server side. Okay.
Huh.
Thank you.
Sure. So are you suggesting that that we don't use the route string to navigate, that instead, for instance, when the application creates this tile or like this anchored link tag, that it would not just dispatch a new URL, but would instead already know that it's supposed to load a product detail page and then do that and then update the URL when the page loads?
Technically, it's one of optimization point, but I don't think it will work in all cases, so I don't suggest it. No.
It's something that we've tried. Well, it's something that applications have tried. It's a reasonable suggestion because you're right, the information is there. The trouble is that it's an additional code path, because if I want to link and share this URL, it also needs to fully load from root.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the biggest problem.
Yeah.
But in this case, I believe storefront rendering, server-side rendering will help. Just in this case, when you go on first page of application, because
Yes.
you can embed information about routing in page in this case, and just return this page.
That's true. Server-side rendering would help here. But again, that's two different code paths to get to the same place. This isn't an application that can use the same front end and back end to render. We don't have, in our own Pro Cloud, we don't have the ability to render like the React application that generates this HTML on the server side. So right now we already kind of have a hybrid approach with the PWA, where it renders just the outer shell of HTML with a simple template, and then it loads and renders the rest client side. And it does that because the outer template is already placing a server-side request to get this same information, like product and the product's ID. So it's like,
Okay, guys, so maybe let's wrap up with this proposal for now. As I understand, we need, I don't know, it needs somebody to investigate if it's possible to implement on the backend. Anyway,
yeah,
I'm not
I
sure
agree.
who can it be. Probably makes sense to talk to Igor. I don't know.
Okay.
Depending when you need it. In general, I guess all this makes sense, but yeah, we still don't know how difficult it will be to support it.
Sure. It sounds like we need to find out how much runtime performance penalty there will be to implementing that whole introspection chain. And Also, there are other ways that we could represent this routing information in the GraphQL schema. So we could discuss those too later.
Yeah, it would make sense for people probably to review and leave comments right in the proposal, not just discuss right now. Okay.
Yes, please.
To do anything else today? If nothing else, that's all. Thanks, James.
Oops, can you hear me? Oh, sorry.
Yes.
We can discuss, do we want to keep product SKU as a unique attribute in our database, I believe?
Can you repeat?
We can discuss, do we want to enforce product uniqueness as a database constraint in Magento database? This is a fully
Product SKU uniqueness.
Yeah.
Because technically in Magento currently SKU of product is unique identifier, but you can go to attribute management and disable uniqueness.
Actually, I assure that you can do this. I have some doubts regarding this, because I believe most of our service contracts, even old ones, expect to SKU be unique value. For instance, you have a get by SKU method, and new inventory works with SKU, not with IDs.
Anton, can you describe the problem for everyone?
Okay, right now we don't have any unique constraint in our database, in our table, to enforce product uniqueness in a catalog product entity table. As a result, various of the external integration with PIM systems cause product SKU duplication without any business need, and with harm to Magento internal system workflows. So my proposal is to enable this unique constraint for catalog product entity table, and prepare kind of migration patch script to ensure that merchants will be able to apply this.
Okay, so let's look at the proposal. Okay, so you propose to add uniqueness constraint on the database level, backward compatibility. We can enforce SKU uniqueness through the database patch. Can you explain?
I just need to remember that based on our backward compatibility guide, add uniqueness scale to database is major backward incompatible change.
Exactly.
So what do you mean
but
the database patch?
Like this is feature gap, so it has to be unique.
I disagree with you about it.
Okay.
Product with a higher ID will keep an SKU. Well, can you explain what is through the database patch? What do you mean?
Okay, right now Magento declarative schema and Magento setup supports declarative patches. So you can create a patch which will be one during upgrade. This patch may contain some logic to update data between Magento different versions.
Okay. Can you add reference to database patch? I think it's described in DevDocs, because it's not clear whether you are talking about some generic term for databases or is it Magento thing.
As well, I'm talking about Magento setup. I believe it should be clear. Okay.
All duplicates will get a unique suffix. For transparency, we will get a report of duplicates that were resolved by the patch. Another option is enforcing the uniqueness check for fresh installations only. So, okay. Andrei, what did you say? What's your concern? Is it backward compatibility, or in general you think it shouldn't be unique?
In general, I think it should not be unique because it's business rule.
Really?
So usually a company has unique SKUs. Like one company, as I know, would not have multiple products with the same SKU, but potentially on Magento you may have products with the same SKU if you trying to sell products from different companies on your website, and those companies and SKU of those companies overlap.
Yeah, the same as GT, the same as other unique identifiers. And we have a rich attributes management system to support such cases. But we need a source of truth inside of Magento. How we identify that this product is exactly this product. In other hand, each integration with PIM system will not be able to update your product. It always has to create a new product, because you cannot say that what is a unique attribute in your system.
Yeah, it just is a matter of supporting this use case and priority of it. I don't think that it will affect a lot of people, because in order to, like, you need to sell products from multiple companies, and SKUs of products of these companies needs to overlap. It's possible, but probably unlikely.
Even Googling briefly regarding the case which Igor just mentioned, I found several cases when people stuck with this issue when they have the duplication entity in a product entity where the SKU overlapped.
No.
So we already have these cases, so we just can't disregard them.
Oh, yeah, really. This is why we have to perform some migration scripts regarding to our MBI team. This is 7% of merchant. 7. It's pretty significant number.
10% of what? Of merchants with
of merchants connected
mistakes?
to Magento Business Intelligence. 7% of merchants who connected to who are using Magento Business Intelligence have this issue with this SKU duplication.
By mistake, you mean?
I believe in most cases. So exists I don't know. I cannot imagine this case when somebody created a unique, not unique SKU in our system, especially taking into account the fact that our UI and our application PHP business logic has a constraint which had to prevent to do this. So
how do you propose to resolve this overlapping?
Actually, we have a two strategy here. So we can upgrade all SKUs and provide to merchant reports. That's okay. We found this number of duplicates and we resolve them in some ways, but you can do something manually with them, because I believe in most cases this is redundant duplicates, and merchant technically doesn't need such IDs. Other case we can do exactly as MSI did. So we can set up a new Magento installations with a unique key for SKU and keep regular index for existing ones, and make this upgrade optional for such merchants.
We have so many extension customization which currently directly rely on joins to the catalog product entity table, where we have this overlapping right now.
Yeah.
So introducing the new table would not fix this issue.
I don't propose to introduce a new table. I propose to introduce this is an additional option, so we can deploy this fix as a patch model, which will have only this change in database schema. So in case you enable this model, you will change your not unique index with unique one. For all new merchants, this model will be enabled by default, but for existing merchants, they may do this change on their decision.
As I understand, you propose to have the kind of CLI suite as a part of this module, and but the decision of what particular SKU should be or what particular product should be dropped from the database should be manual decision of that merchant.
Yeah, I believe it should. It can be resolved only this way.
But along with that, probably we may have several or many product ID dependencies on that product, which gonna be removed. So we need to change all the dependency on product ID for the correct product.
Why?
So let's say you have two overlapping with the same SKU, so SKU1, but you will have two different product ID, like 1 and 2.
Exactly.
And other dependencies will, which actually rely on the SKU1, but they have a dependency on either 1 or 2. So the merchant is supposed to choose the correct product. So let's say the product with the product ID 2, and fix all the product ID dependency from 1 to 2 on all other tables, just to keep data consistent.
Possible, but I believe in our case, it's better to provide the merchant possibility to update a SKU for old product versions. I believe in most cases when we have a SKU duplication, this is a different version of the one product that appears as some kind of import scenario. So in case merchant, in this case, merchant still will have a consistent data, but SKU will be unique, and merchant will have a clear vision which of the SKU were duplicated.
Correct, but to make this transition for those merchants who already have this overlapping to the state where they wouldn't have this overlapping, you're supposed to drop one of the products. Just to satisfy the requirement that SKU should be unique in the table.
But we technically can update it for this.
Proposal is to add unique suffix now. For duplicates, so get the unique suffix.
Yes, we can add a unique suffix for previous versions and provide the merchant even report which will show to him that, okay, we identified these duplicates, we resolve these collisions, but maybe you don't need these SKUs in your system at all. Or you can keep it for data consistency in case, as you mentioned, you have orders or, I don't know, something else connected to it.
Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe we need here some feedback from product guys. But for me, it looks like we are not solving the problem. We are just solving the problem from the database perspective. But if you want to achieve the real data consistency, probably we're supposed to shrink this overlapping and have just the only version of product.
Yeah.
Or just provide a way for merchant to do.
Sure, we will. When I'm saying that we will show the merchant the report, I mean that we provide to him a possibility to choose strategy how to resolve these collisions. My point is that we cannot make this decision instead of merchant. Merchant has to make this decision by his own.
That's actually why I said, so initially I asked you whether it's going to be manual decision. You said yes, so I suppose that this tool should, it should be interactive with merchant, and merchant should specify what the strategy of this transition going to be.
Because I understand the simple implementation will be that there will be a report about duplicated SKUs, and then merchant can go to admin panel, for example, and either remove or one of the products or update SKUs. So, I don't know if it would be ideal to have an interactive tool, but probably even just logging will be sufficient.
It's
And I don't know, it
definitely
also
better.
depends. It also depends on number of duplicated products. I don't know if it can be hundreds. I don't know what will be the experience. So
It really depends on extensions.
So in any case, we need at least some discussion with product team, and it would be ideal to describe why we even discuss this, like what real problems are we trying to solve, except that it just doesn't look right. So I don't know, like you
I discussed that question with Misha Chernenko, who is product owner of Catalog, and from his standpoint, product SKU has to be unique in all scenarios. So actually, we have an answer from product organization.
Yeah, but in any case, it's pretty major change.
Major.
And we should be really careful doing that. So that probably I really recommend to work initially on a proposal describing how this tool may work. So I believe if you'll decide to go with this solution, it's pretty fine. So we can do as you propose, like make the switchable model, which would be disabled by default for those who make an upgrade, and it would be enabled for those who make the fresh installation. So I believe that may work, and we just need to describe how this tool gonna work and what exactly, as Olga mentioned, what exactly problem it's gonna solve and how this problem may appear for particular merchant. Because maybe this is not the only case when we have that SKU application. So maybe there are other cases. At least I briefly Google right now, and I see that there are several complaints on that the product applications may appear. So we need to investigate these cases. Are there any other ideas or like objections or whatever?
Yeah, so for me, I would like to see, because I agree it's a significant change, I would like to see business value from it, not just that, okay, it's not correct.
I can say there's business value. There's business value for the consumers of the GraphQL API because this makes product much more like other like top level entities in the schema, and it would probably make it easier for the GraphQL team to implement a common ID type across all entities. And then that makes it much easier for client systems like progressive web apps or native apps to store a normalized representation of the sitemap or the catalog that can then be like easily synchronized once everything has a common unique ID. So there's definitely an advantage for consumers.
Everything should have a unique ID. The question, so yeah, it's one of the reasons actually that if we are going to use SKU as a unique ID for product entities, then this is the reason why we want to change it. For example, if there are some problems with order management or with something else, it would be good to have it in the proposal.
Actually, you know that we even cannot guarantee which product we are returning with a product repository get product method because of we don't know.
Are we using SKU right now?
Yes, we are using SKU for catalog service contracts. We are using SKU for inventory service contracts, and I believe we are using SKU.
We also use SKU.
Yeah, in GraphQL we are using SKU as well.
So yeah, it would be that's the problem that I see, but it would be good to have it in the proposal. So everybody are like, I don't think everybody are in context. So it would be good to have it described here.
It's strange, to be honest.
What is strange?
Yeah, one thing that is difficult for us as consumers of GraphQL is GraphQL includes a specific ID type. Like it's represented as a string in the transmission layer, but ID types are there to do uniqueness across an entity namespace. So all of the good tools like expect an ID type to be there, but because some of our entities use integer types as IDs and some of them use strings like SKUs, we don't use a common ID type. So I feel like maybe doing something like this would make it easier for the GraphQL team to do that, but I'm not the GraphQL team, so I don't know that for sure.
Okay, so anyways, it's my opinion that it would be good to add Anything else?
Okay, I will add some more information why it's valuable to have a unique identifier for products in our system. Good.
We have ID right now.
We cannot
We
rely
can
on
have
ID.
UID or whatever.
We don't have a UID, and we cannot rely on ID because it's database identifier, and we do support replace mechanism for import. So each time when import happens, we cannot guarantee that next time ID for this SKU will be exactly the same. So this is the main reason why we have to keep why we have to have one source of truth for uniqueness in our system.
Yeah. So we don't say that this is not valuable, but for such major changes, we definitely need to work it more carefully, and we need to prepare the document which describe all the pros and cons, and which also describe the implication for merchant and the backwards and compatible changes which this proposal introduces. So we just need to spend more time and to.
Sure. Okay.
I sent in the chat interesting article. It talks about different identifiers, and it suggests that school for merchant should be unique. So if merchant sells product from different companies, it would probably make sense for this merchant to have different identifiers, different SKUs for the same product that belongs to multiple companies. So it will have different SKUs, but some other identifiers for this product might be the same because it's the same product. So maybe, I don't know, maybe add a link to proposal why it makes sense, because I think it's a good article.
Okay. In this case, I will add more details to this document, and let's wait for more feedback from community, guys, because I believe that's from my standpoint, we have to do this, but maybe exist reasons that I don't know why we cannot apply this. And yeah, I understand this is pretty significant backward and compatible change, but my point is we don't have other options. We already have this check, but this check doesn't work. So to make this fix, we have to do a backward and compatible. Maybe even bump major version of catalog model.
Okay. Good. Anything else? If not, then I think we are done. Pretty big topics for today, but yeah, interesting. Okay, then that's all, and see you next time.